My name is Anya Petrova. I used to work in a world where silence was a shield and truth was a weapon you only used when your back was against the wall. Now, I rebuild what time and conflict have broken. I am a historical architect specializing in the restoration of war-torn structures. I spend my days in places like Kiev and Sarajevo, breathing life back into buildings that have seen the worst of humanity, believing that to mend a wall is to mend a memory, to restore a facade is to restore a future. It's a quiet, demanding life, one lived among the ghosts of the past. But ghosts, I've learned, are not confined to ancient cities. Sometimes, they sit at your own family's dinner table, smiling politely while they erase you. They laughed when I said I'd left the global development sector. Not a real laugh, but the soft, dismissive chuckle of people who have never had to choose between a career and a conscience. It was my mother's 60th birthday dinner, held at a vineyard in the rolling hills of Napa Valley, a world away from the grit and dust of my life. To them, my departure from the prestigious Meridian Group was a failure, a quiet admission that I couldn't handle the pressure. My cousin, Mark, a man whose greatest international experience was a week in Cabo, even raised a glass. "Well, at least she's back on solid ground now," he'd said with a wink. "Swapping out blueprints for, well, what is it you do now, Anya?" I sat at the end of the long, beautifully set table, a ghost in a linen dress, chewing on a piece of artisan bread that tasted like dust. They toasted my brother, Daniel, on his promotion at a venture capital firm. They praised my sister-in-law, Chloe, for her flawless execution of the party. Chloe, the same woman who had once called me in a panic from a conference in Dubai, having accidentally emailed a sensitive investor prospectus to a competitor. I had spent 4 hours on a satellite phone, walking a contact through the process of recalling the data packet, a quiet favor that saved her career and Daniel's reputation. No one at the table remembered that. They only remembered the narrative they had constructed. Anya, the wanderer, the idealist, the one who chose dusty, complicated places over the clean, profitable world they all inhabited. So when the doorbell of the private dining room chimed and a young man in a crisp, dark suit walked in, I barely registered him. He looked like one of the vineyard's event coordinators, perhaps, or a driver for one of the guests. He scanned the room, his eyes professional and detached, until they landed on me. And then he froze. A flicker of disbelief, then a wave of profound, unmistakable respect. He took a step forward, his voice clear and steady, cutting through the self-congratulatory chatter. "Ms. Petrova? My apologies for the intrusion. My name is Agent Miller. I was a junior attaché at the embassy in Belgrade. I read your final report on the Balkan Reconstruction Initiative. It was foundational. It's an honor to meet you in person. You could have heard a grape drop." My wine glass, which I had been gripping too tightly, slipped from my fingers, its contents spilling across the white linen like a fresh wound. And just like that, the comfortable, boisterous room fell silent. Because the past they had so carefully edited, the life they had dismissed as a series of misguided adventures, had just walked through the door and given it a name. Not a title, but a truth. And that truth was the beginning of the end of their story, and the beginning of mine. My name is Anya Petrova. Before I tell you my story, the real one, I want to know you're here with me. Say hello in the comments. Let me know where in the world you are. Sometimes, knowing a story has found a home in a distant city is all the encouragement a quiet voice needs. And if my journey resonates with you, please consider liking, following, or subscribing. It's how we build a community where stories like this can not only survive but thrive. Thank you. Now, let me take you back. I hadn't been home to Napa in 3 years, but the valley was stubbornly, beautifully the same. The late autumn light, thick and golden as honey, spilled over hills stitched with rows of dormant vines. The air smelled of damp earth and distant wood smoke. My family's estate, a sprawling Tuscan-style villa named Viridian, stood sentinel on its own private hill, its sandstone walls glowing in the sunset. It was a place of breathtaking beauty and suffocating expectations. Tonight was my mother, Eleanor's 60th birthday, and I, the daughter who had chosen rubble over vineyards, was the guest of honor who felt like an intruder. The party was a symphony of quiet wealth. A string quartet played softly on the veranda. Waitstaff in crisp white jackets moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and intricately constructed canapes. My return was met with a chorus of air kisses and carefully curated compliments that felt more like assessments. Eleanor greeted me, her hand cool on my arm. Her perfume, a bespoke gardenia blend, was the scent of my entire childhood, a fragrance of both comfort and judgment. "Anya, darling, you look healthy," she said, her eyes doing a swift calculation of the cost of my simple silk dress. My father, Richard, gave me a perfunctory hug, his mind clearly on the stock market ticker he was probably picturing in his head. "Good of you to make it," he murmured, already turning to greet a more important guest. And then there was Daniel, my older brother, and his wife, Chloe. "The prodigal daughter returns," Daniel boomed, clapping me on the shoulder a little too hard. Chloe smiled, a perfect, polished smile that never reached her eyes. "We were so worried you wouldn't get away. Things must be so chaotic where you've been." I was seated at the far end of the main table, a strategic placement that was both an honor and an isolation. "We thought you'd want some space to breathe," Eleanor had explained. I watched them hold court, my family. The conversation was a river of stock options, second homes, and school admissions for my niece and nephew, Sophie and Ben. Chloe handed me a glass of the estate's award-winning Chardonnay. I noticed a small, almost invisible chip on the rim. "I hope this one is all right," she'd said. "The staff can be so clumsy." A small, subtle signal. "You are not worth our best." They asked me questions that were not questions at all. "So, you're still doing that charity work? Didn't you used to be with that big development group?" I would nod and offer a simple, sanitized response. "I consult on post-conflict infrastructure projects." Daniel, ever the pragmatist, would laugh. "So, you tell people how to rebuild bridges you didn't have to watch get blown up? Sounds stable." The words were pebbles, not boulders, but enough of them over a lifetime could bury a person. Every attempt I made to share a real story, about the resilience of the women I'd worked with in a small Bosnian village, about the way a restored library had become the beating heart of a community, was met with a polite "they can smile" before the subject was swiftly changed back to something more palatable, more profitable. I watched my niece, Sophie, a bright, curious 9-year-old, sneak a macaroon from the dessert table. She caught my eye and gave me a conspiratorial wink. Her hug earlier had been the only truly solid thing I had felt all evening, her small arms wrapped tight around my neck. "I missed you, Aunt Anya," she had whispered. "I read all the postcards you sent." My gaze drifted across the room and landed on a young waiter, David, who was watching me with an intensity that was out of place. He wasn't looking at me with the practiced indifference of serving staff. It was a look of recognition. When our eyes met, he gave a slight, respectful nod and turned away. Something about his posture, the economy of his movement, was familiar. Nearby, a guest I didn't know, a man named Adrian, though I wouldn't learn his name until later, was toying with a silver pen, its tip catching the light as he angled it around the room. My skin prickled. The instincts honed in war zones, the hyper-awareness of my surroundings, flared to life. Not everyone at this party was here for the wine. And Chloe. My God, Chloe. When my father mentioned a new offshore investment fund he was considering, her eyes darted to Daniel for a microsecond, a flash of shared, anxious knowledge. It was a look I knew well. It was the look of a shared secret, a hidden vulnerability. But at that table, I was the only one who saw these things. To everyone else, I was just a shadow. They raised their glasses to Daniel, who had just secured a massive round of funding for his firm. I stared at the tiny chip in my wine glass, the fractured crystals splitting the candlelight into a dozen warring fragments. I once negotiated a ceasefire between two rival warlords over a shared water well, I thought. Now, I'm not even trusted with undamaged glassware. My fingers found the familiar comfort of the small, smooth worry stone in my pocket, a piece of marble I'd picked up from the rubble of a bombed-out cathedral in Mostar. It was a reminder of what endured. When the polite suffocation of the room became too much, I slipped out onto the wide stone terrace. The cool night air was a balm, scented with rosemary from the gardens and the distant, clean smell of the Pacific. I heard footsteps behind me. It was David, the waiter. He stopped a few feet away, his posture respectful but not subservient. "I know who you are, Miss Petrova," he said, his voice low. "I was with the UN peacekeeping force in Kosovo. Your report on the Mitrovica Bridge, it saved lives. It's an honor to be here tonight." I didn't react, years of training holding my body still, my face a neutral mask. The chirping of the crickets seemed to amplify in the sudden silence. In the dark glass of the French doors behind him, I saw my own reflection, my eyes wide and alert. For the first time all night, I felt seen. Truly seen. I wasn't the family disappointment. I was Miss Petrova. And someone remembered. I returned to the dining room as if I had just been admiring the view, as if my entire perception of the evening hadn't just been fractured and reset. The name MS. Petrova was a silent, powerful hum beneath my skin, but I folded my napkin and resumed my seat, the quiet observer. Chloe's voice, artificially sweet, sliced through the murmur of conversation. "Sophie was telling me the most interesting thing earlier," she said, and Anya told her that sometimes the quietest people in the room are the strongest. She gave a tinkling laugh, her eyes finding mine across the table. "Such a romantic notion, isn't it?" Daniel raised his glass. "A toast to the strong, silent types. May they one day find their voices and a sensible career path." The table chuckled. His eyes met mine, a flicker of something pity, triumph, in their depths. A woman from my mother's garden club leaned forward, her diamonds glittering. "And what about you, dear? Are you settled anywhere? Or still living out of a suitcase?" Eleanor intervened smoothly. "Anya has always had a wanderer's spirit. We've learned to give her space." A beautiful, maternal-sounding excuse for their collective disinterest. I said nothing. I breathed. I could feel the smooth, cool surface of the worry stone in my pocket. David returned with the main course. As he placed the pan-seared scallops in front of me, his hand brushed a fork, sending it to the floor with a clatter. As he bent to retrieve it, he leaned in, his voice a barely there whisper against the string music. "Consulate Security Detail, Belgrade, 2018. The Meridian Group data breach. We studied your containment protocol at Langley. They call it the Petrova maneuver." I froze, my hand hovering over my water glass. A deep, internal tremor went through me. My professional history, a life I had deliberately compartmentalized and buried, was being spoken aloud in the heart of the one place I thought was safe from it. Chloe's eyes narrowed. She had seen the exchange, if not heard the words. "What was that all about?" "Making friends with the help, Anya." Her tone was laced with implication. Daniel laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "It's not a mystery, Chloe. It's a void. If you don't have a real life, you have to invent one, I suppose." I still said nothing. My gaze flickered to Adrian, the man with the pen. He was now in a low, intense conversation with another guest, a man with the unmistakable posture of a former military operator. Not friends. A handler and an asset. Daniel leaned back, delivering the final, casual blow. "Honestly, Anya, after the first year or two, I don't think any of us really noticed you were gone." And that's when David, returning with a water pitcher, stumbled. The pitcher fell, not shattering, but sending a cascade of ice and water across the floor with a loud, disruptive crash. As he knelt to clean it up, his voice rose, not in a whisper, but in a clear, formal tone that sliced through every other sound in the room. "My deepest apologies, Miss Petrova. My training didn't cover serving a senior international diplomat during a private family event. I am out of my depth." The silence that fell was immediate and absolute. Daniel's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. My father, Richard, pushed his chair back from the table. My mother's hand flew to her pearls, her mouth a perfect O of shock. Chloe stared at David as if he had just sprouted wings. "What in God's name did you just say?" she breathed. I stood up, my movements slow, deliberate. I placed my napkin on the table. "I had not intended to discuss my work tonight," I said, my voice even, calm. "But since a member of the Diplomatic Security Corps has inadvertently brought it up, I will clarify. I am no longer with the Meridian Group. For the past 5 years, I was a special envoy for the State Department, attached to post-conflict resolution and stabilization initiatives. While you all assumed I was finding myself, I was negotiating territorial disputes in the Caucasus, overseeing disarmament programs in West Africa, and mediating hostage situations in the Levant. I wasn't wandering. I was working." The silence thickened, becoming heavy, viscous. Daniel tried to muster a sarcastic grin. "Right. And I'm the King of England." "That's a good one, Anya." I looked at David. He had risen to his feet and was standing at attention. "Sir," he said, looking at my brother with cold, professional disdain, "I can assure you, it is not a joke." He was not acting. He was not lying. And neither was I. There is a certain kind of silence that is more articulate than any speech. It's the silence that descends when a comfortable, long-held lie is shattered by an irrefutable truth. That was the silence in that room. The polite smiles had vanished, replaced by masks of confusion, disbelief, and a dawning, uncomfortable awareness. Chloe, ever the pragmatist, was the first to speak. She blinked at me, as if her eyes could recalibrate the image of the person she thought she knew. You work for the government? Like the State Department? For real?" I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. I was a non-career ambassadorial envoy. My designation was Specialist Grade 4. Most of my work was classified under the Global Stability Mandate. It doesn't exist on public record. The words were simple, factual, and they landed in the center of the table like stones, sending ripples of shock through their carefully curated world. What I didn't say, what I could never say, was that this was not a career I had celebrated. It was a burden I had carried. It was a life of ghosts. The identity of MS Petrova was not a cloak of power. It was a shroud of solitude, woven from years of secrets I could never share and losses I could never mourn publicly. I had tried to leave after Leo, my partner in the field, was killed in a car bomb in Beirut. We had been too close, worked together for too long. His loss was a wound that would not heal. I was 20 feet away when the bomb detonated, the force of it throwing me against a wall. He was not so lucky. I had requested a transfer, then a leave of absence, anything to get away from the ghosts. The response had been a terse, encrypted cable. "Your operational knowledge is a critical asset. Your request is denied." I wasn't a person to them. I was a repository of sensitive information, a key they couldn't afford to lose. My knowledge had become my cage. Back in the dining room, my mother found her voice. It was soft, tinged with a new, uncertain timbre. "So, you were safe? All this time. Safe." The word tasted like ash in my mouth. My father, Richard, adjusted his tie, a nervous, reflexive gesture. "Well, if we had known, we could have told people." "It's very impressive, Anya." As if my life's work was a new, shiny credential he could now add to the family portfolio. I didn't grace that with a response. In my head, a single, bitter thought resonated. They don't mourn what I lost. They only see what they can now claim. A small hand tugged at my sleeve. It was Sophie, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. "Aunt Anya? Are you a spy?" I managed a small, sad smile. "I used to be someone who tried to fix broken things in secret, sweetie. Someone who tried to protect people even if they never knew they were in danger." She held my gaze, her expression preternaturally serious. Then she leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. A man took your picture. When you first came in. By the big fireplace. My blood ran cold. The quiet, professional hum of my training took over. My eyes did a slow, calm sweep of the room. Adrian. He was still there, by the doors to the terrace, pretending to be engrossed in his phone. But his posture was too still, his attention focused not on the screen, but on me. He raised his hand to his ear, a subtle touch to an earpiece. A barely visible red light blinked once. It was a confirmation signal. I'd seen it 100 times, in 100 dangerous places. Adrian wasn't a guest. He was a shadow from a life I thought I had escaped. He was here for me. And he was not alone. The party didn't so much end as dissolve. The remaining guests offered hurried, awkward goodbyes, fleeing the oppressive atmosphere. The string quartet had long since packed up, leaving behind a silence that was filled only by the crackle of the fire and the unspoken recriminations hanging in the air. No one looked at me. My father busied himself with the wine bottles. My mother directed the staff to clear the table, her movements jerky and unnatural. It was Chloe who finally approached me in the grand hallway, her face pale. She handed me a creased, yellowed envelope. Mom found this in a box of old Christmas cards a few months ago, she murmured, not meeting my eyes. She said she didn't know what to do with it. I took it. The handwriting was my own, rushed and spidery. The postmark was from a UN field office in a country whose name alone was synonymous with loss. I had written it on a night when I was sure I would not see the morning. I opened it. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. Please know that everything I did because I believed it mattered. Don't let my silence be a source of pain. Let it be a testament to a life lived for a purpose. I thought, my voice was a rough whisper. I thought this was lost in transit. Chloe shook her head. No. It arrived. She just put it away. The quiet cruelty of it, the deliberate act of burying my potential last words, settled in my chest like a stone. The memory of that night came rushing back. The final hours of the Balkan Initiative. Leo and I had been evacuating an orphanage when the ceasefire broke. He'd pushed the encrypted hard drive containing evidence of a shadow government's war crimes into my pack. Go, he'd said, his own leg trapped under a fallen beam. The world needs to know this. It's worth more than I am. I had argued, tried to free him, but the sound of approaching mortar fire had made the choice for me. I had run, carrying the weight of his sacrifice and the truth he had died to protect. I never looked back. Because I knew if I did, a part of me would stay buried in that rubble forever. When I finally stepped out of the villa into the cool, dark night, David was waiting by my car. His professional demeanor was gone, replaced by a raw, angry grief. You're the one who walked away, he said, his voice tight. My cousin was in that orphanage. Leo. He died, and you walked out with a hard drive. I didn't just walk away, I said, my voice low and fierce. He made me go. He chose to trade his life for the truth on that drive. It was his choice, not mine. David shook his head, his face a mask of pain. And now you expect me to believe you're on the side of the angels? Why should I trust you? I met his gaze, my own grief a raw, open wound. Because I don't want anyone else to have to make the choice that Leo did. I don't want any more secrets to be buried under the bodies of good men. But I could see it was no use. The fragile trust that had sparked between us was extinguished. Some truths are too heavy to build bridges with. They can only mark the chasms between us. Back in my sterile hotel room, my phone buzzed. An untraceable number. A single line of text. The Meridian Group sends its regards. Your retirement has been rescinded. A cold dread washed over me. I opened my secure State Department laptop, my fingers flying over the keys. I ran a diagnostic on the party on Viridian. A single, pulsing red appeared on the screen. A high-frequency data transmitter. Active, recent, and dangerously close. It was coming from the Vineyard's main office, just a few hundred yards from where we had been dining. The game was already in motion. The Vineyard office was dark and silent, but the air inside was charged, electric. I moved through the shadows, a ghost in my own right, my senses on high alert. Tucked behind a large filing cabinet, I found it, a small, sophisticated surveillance hub. Its access log confirmed my worst fears. The user ID was Adrian7. Adrian. The name was a key, unlocking a cascade of buried memories. Adrian Vessler. A disgraced former intelligence officer, a man who sold secrets to the highest bidder. I had personally overseen the operation that led to his supposed capture and imprisonment years ago. The official report said he had died during an attempted prison escape. Another convenient lie. He was alive, and he was working for Meridian, the very organization I had fought to expose. I delved deeper, my fingers a blur on the keyboard. Something had given him access to my family, a way into their lives. And then I found it. A series of emails on Daniel's publicly accessible cloud server. In his desperate bid to secure funding for a new tech venture, he had been courted by an international investment firm called Helios Capital. Helios was a known front for Meridian. Daniel, in his ambition and naivete, had not only given them his business plan, he had given them a full guest list to the party, complete with mini-biographies. He had, unknowingly, handed me to them on a silver platter. The implications were suffocating. This was not a random act of vengeance. This was a calculated, engineered trap. Late that night, my phone rang. It was Chloe, her voice a frantic, terrified sob. Anya, it's Sophie. She didn't come home from her riding lesson. The driver isn't answering his phone. Her location tracker, it's been turned off. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded my system. Daniel's voice came on the line, dismissive and annoyed. It's probably just a dead battery, Chloe. You're overreacting. But I knew. In the pit of my stomach, I knew. This was not a dead battery. This was their next move. I patched into the State Department's emergency tracking network. Sophie's last known location was an abandoned shipping warehouse down by the old port of Richmond, miles from her route home. Not a place a 9-year-old girl should be. I was dressed and out the door in under a minute, my go-bag slung over my shoulder. As I ran down the hotel stairs, my phone buzzed again. A video file. No sender. I pressed play. The image was grainy, poorly lit. Sophie, sitting in a metal chair, her small hands tied in front of her. She wasn't crying, but her face was pale, her eyes huge with terror. Then Adrian Vessler stepped into the frame. He looked older, leaner, but his eyes held the same cold, reptilian intelligence. His voice was a smooth, cultured whisper. The last time we were in this position, Ms. Petrova, you chose the mission over the man. You chose the data over a life. Let's see if you've learned anything. He smiled, a thin, cruel curve of his lips. The screen went black. No demands. No ransom. Just a choice. A ghost from my past, forcing me to relive my greatest failure, my deepest wound. And this time, the life on the line was not a partner, a soldier. It was my niece. It was a child. It was the one piece of my family that still felt pure and whole. The port was a skeleton of rust and decay, the air thick with the smell of salt and rot. I moved through the labyrinth of abandoned warehouses, a shadow among shadows. The skills I had tried so hard to forget came back to me, as natural as breathing. The coordinates led me to a large, corrugated steel building at the end of a deserted pier. The door was unlocked. Inside, a single light bulb illuminated a scene ripped from my nightmares. He had recreated the safe house in Beirut. The same sparse furniture, the same layout. And in the center, Sophie, tied to a chair. On the wall behind her, a large monitor played a continuous loop of the security footage from that day. The explosion, the fire, the chaos. Leo's last moments, played over and over. Vessler's voice echoed from hidden speakers. He believed in the mission, didn't he? He thought the truth was worth dying for. A noble sentiment. And a foolish one. You ran. You saved the data. Was it worth it, Anya? Let her go. Vessler, I shouted, my voice raw. This is between you and me. Oh, it is, the voice purred. But I find a little leverage helps to clarify one's priorities. I was about to make a move, any move, when I heard a sound behind me. It was David, his face set and grim. You didn't really think I'd let you walk into this alone, did you? He said quietly. Leo was my cousin. But he was your partner. He wouldn't have wanted this. We didn't need to speak. We moved in concert, a shared history of training and loss guiding our actions. I would breach from the front, create the distraction. He would circle around to the loading bay. The moment I stepped into the room, Vessler was there, a gun in his hand. He wasn't pointing it at Sophie. He was pointing it at a small, sleek device on the table. A high-intensity data-wiping device. The drive, Anya, he said calmly. The one Leo died for. I know you have a copy. You always have a copy. You trade me the drive. The girl walks. A simple transaction. My hand went to the false bottom of my water bottle where the encrypted drive was hidden. Leo's legacy. The proof of Meridian's crimes. My gaze flickered from the drive, to Sophie, to the looping video of Leo's death. History, repeating itself as tragedy. But this time, something was different. I was not alone, and I was not the same woman who had run from that burning building. A crash from the back of the warehouse. David. Vessler spun, firing a single shot into the darkness. A cry of pain. And in that split second of distraction, I didn't run for the drive. I ran for Sophie. The world exploded into a cacophony of motion and sound. I cut Sophie's bonds, shielding her small body with my own. Vessler turned back, his face a mask of fury. But just as he raised his gun, a new voice, shaking but resolute, cut through the chaos. Don't you touch them. It was my father. He stood in the doorway, pale and terrified, holding a heavy tire iron from the trunk of his car. He was followed by my brother, Daniel, his face a mixture of fear and a dawning, horrified understanding. It was the most pathetic, beautiful, and brave thing I had ever seen. The standoff was broken by the wail of sirens. David had managed to trigger his emergency beacon. Vessler, knowing the game was up, made a final, desperate move, lunging for the data-wiping device. But I was faster. I kicked the table, sending the device flying. It shattered against the concrete floor. The rest was a blur of flashing lights, shouting agents, and the overwhelming relief of Sophie's small, trembling body in my arms. Vessler was apprehended. David was being treated for a flesh wound. My father and brother were being questioned, their faces a canvas of shame and regret. We had survived. But survival, I knew, was not the same as healing. The aftermath was quiet, sterile. Daniel's business partner, Bryce, was taken into custody. The subsequent investigation revealed a complex web of shell corporations and illicit funding, with my father's unwitting investment at its core. He wasn't charged with a crime, but his reputation, the currency he valued above all else, was in ruins. The family gathered not for a party, but for a quiet, painful reckoning in the stark white of a hospital waiting room. No one knew what to say. The narratives they had built their lives around had crumbled. I was the one who spoke first. I walked to the center of the room, and I placed the small, chipped worry stone from Mostar on the table between them. This, I said, my voice clear and steady, is what's left of a cathedral that was 1,000 years old. It was destroyed in a war, by men who thought that by breaking the stone, they could break the spirit of the people. But they were wrong, because the spirit isn't in the stone. It's in the people who come back and rebuild. It's in the choice to believe in something beautiful, even when you're surrounded by rubble. I looked at my family, at their broken, bewildered faces. I spent my life trying to rebuild broken places. I never thought the hardest one would be my own. There was no grand reconciliation that day. Healing isn't a single event. It's a process, as slow and painstaking as restoring an ancient map. But something had shifted. The silence between us was no longer a weapon. It was a space. A space for a new story to be written. Months later, I received a package. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal. The first page was a letter from my mother. "I spent your whole life being proud of the things I could understand," she wrote. "Your grades, your accomplishments. I never learned to be proud of the things I couldn't see, your courage, your strength, your heart. I am trying to learn now." The rest of the journal was filled with postcards Sophie had written to me, one for every week I had been away. They were filled with the simple, profound truths of a child's love. The final entry was a single photograph. It was of me on the day of my graduation from the diplomatic corps, a photo I had never seen. I was in my formal uniform, shaking hands with the Secretary of State. But my gaze was fixed on something off camera. In the background, unnoticed by anyone, Leah was giving me a proud, goofy thumbs up. It was a picture of a partnership, a shared secret, a moment of pure, unadulterated pride. My father had found it in a box of my old things. He had not written a note. He didn't need to. I don't know if my family will ever fully be mended. Some breaks are too deep. Some fissures go right to the foundation. But we are rebuilding. Slowly, tentatively. We are learning a new language, one where strength is not measured in silence, and love is not a conditional clause. Last week, I received an offer. A private foundation, funded by a group of philanthropists, wants me to lead a new initiative. The Global Heritage Restoration Fund. Not to mediate, not to negotiate, but simply to rebuild. To take the broken, beautiful things of the world and make them whole again. I haven't given them my answer yet. For the first time in my life, I am not running toward a crisis or away from a ghost. I am standing still. I am on my own map, in a place of my own choosing. And I am finally home.